All right, everyone, welcome to a special edition of All Things Money, where we focus on the latest budget, which just came out a few minutes back. And as always, it's been a disappointment. So, guys, what's up? Naveen, let's start with you. What do you think about it?
Okay, that's a very innocent question, right? What do you think? How do you define a good or a bad budget? So, if we talk about macroeconomic stabilization, I think in the past year, yes, we've achieved something on paper. But if you look at the budget from the perspective of whether it will generate economic growth, whether it will lift people out of poverty, whether it will develop a robust middle class, whether it will limit the formation of a parallel economy, not formation, but the growth of a parallel economy. I'm not entirely
I
sure.
mean, whether it will do anything new at all.
So there's no structural reform that we've noticed so far. There has been no effort in widening the tax base. So you're essentially taxing the same people in the sense that there has been some reduction in the slabs for the salaried class. So that is a positive change, but it has been offset by additional GST on a bunch of other products, goods and services that should offset it. There has been a levy on fuel, which should again bring you back at the same place. So it's more of the same.
Yeah. So essentially, it's like the same it was last year. Actually, I mean, if it's last year and this year, there's barely any difference, I would say. At least, I mean,
Yeah.
every year you just introduce at least something new, something more adventurous. This time around, there's just literally, I don't see anything new. Anything you would say, okay, you know what, this may just change things a bit. This may just push the needle somewhere. Nothing's happening there.
Nothing other than perhaps the government's fascination with crypto and Bitcoin.
Is that covered in the budget?
No,
They've
it
talked
doesn't.
about the allocation of 2,000 megawatts of subsidized electricity.
In the budget? Did they
So
use the
they've
word
been making
subsidy?
these announcements.
No, no, in the budget, in the way
I
the
no,
scope is just the budget
no,
document, right?
no. As far as I know, no,
Ah,
because I think
Government
there
speech,
was
as far as
there
I
was
recall.
pushback from IMF, right?
yeah, as it should be.
So, but overall, yeah, it's a pretty non-event. I mean, like,
I mean, it's always a non-event. We just make it an event.
I mean, it can be an event. I mean, in terms of deficit, it can be an event. I think that now that they're curtailing it, so it becomes a non-event because revenue side, not much has changed. It's still non-tax revenues are driving. I think the only major improvement, if you would call it, is the interest expense going or at least subsiding.
But that's
a
more
bit.
of a monetary policy.
Exactly.
I mean, the monetary
Because the rates are
the
coming
rates are
down.
going down.
Yeah,
Structurally, they're coming down. So that's changing. There's nothing really on the.
Nothing they have done to actually get there, right? Yeah.
So essentially, it's a non-event. One thing that I've noticed, they've increased the cash withdrawal tax to 1%. I don't know why it keeps on happening. The evidence has been contrary. The more you increase it, the more you actually push people out of the financial system.
So there is a concept called the laughers curve, right? Which is that there is an optimal.
At this point, it's a laughing curve.
That's where we are really. So the government's approach to taxation is very lazy, and I use that word very cautiously. I would rather use other words. But because they rely heavily on indirect taxation like GST and FED and additional customs duties, I've run out of the words that they use, levies and duties and whatever, surcharges. So, right?
There's a new
And-
spelling there as a levy.
I know. So their direct taxes are less than half of their tax collection. So which is actually very sad. What they really need to focus on is perhaps taxing the easiest possible segment that they can even do it today. Even that's the real estate. The real estate sector, okay, it's subject to a wealth tax of sorts, right? Because your stamp duty is sort of like it applies to the transaction size, and that price is not reflective of the actual market price. Your DC rates and your FBR rates, they're like one third or one fifth of what the actual transaction price is. So that is one distortion that can be immediately fixed.
So that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
That tax and that materializes when the transaction happens.
Yeah.
When the transaction isn't happening, the tax on that doesn't materialize.
No, but the transactions are happening. If you see all of these developments, if you drive around phase 8, you'll see that
But
there is-
not in the last, I would say, 2 years. Whatever happened was before that, a few years back, maybe right after COVID, but nothing in the last 2 years. It's been a fairly dud.
You'd be surprised at the volume of transactions that are happening. The transactions are just not getting registered, and I have personally witnessed people doing transfers using power of attorneys and stuff like that, which kind of, sort of short circuits the system. And again, you are driving people away towards a cash based economy. If I am to do a real estate transaction today, I'm going to have to convert my white wealth to black wealth and carry money like a gangster in a suitcase. So that is how transactions are happening. And that is one area where, it's fairly easy to tax. List down all the houses that are in DHA, see how many tax returns they're appearing on. All of the data is
Mutaher can do it in a night at this point. It's pretty much clear. The data is out there. It's not.
The data is there.
Even on cash withdrawal, even on cash withdrawal, I mean, if you look at the withdrawal trends, I mean, the biggest chunk is not actually coming from branch withdrawals. So you are now targeting a very small portion. In any case, you are ignoring the entire universe, which is coming through ATM, because most of the withdrawals in any case happen via ATMs.
So it's just only through branch withdrawal.
I mean, otherwise, so
you can have still like withdraw more.
That fee is 2375, right? So how do you distinguish between
more than 50,000 through the ATM?
But how do you distinguish between a filer and a non-filer? ATM doesn't have the capacity to do that, right?
It's being debited from the account now. That's see, the point here is this thing hasn't worked. If anything, this has actually driven away depositors. We worry about the savings rate by also pushing away depositors, and it just does not make any sense.
That's true, and I think it unfairly penalizes people who do earn the minimum wage or very close to it, who should be outside the tax regime in any case. Because those are the guys who don't file income tax returns. How difficult is it to file a nil tax return? I mean, you can very easily become a filer.
Why should you file a tax return?
Yeah, actually.
I mean, what value do you extract from it? It's like it's an administrative measure where you're like, and you need a certain level of literacy to get there. Like, you cannot compare yourself with the IRS or the CRA where you're like, okay, the universal literacy, you expect everyone should file a tax. So what?
And it's a very complicated tax return. I mean, literate people like me.
No, people.
I have never been able to figure it out.
You cannot do that. Section 42A bata 2. Fine, go figure it out. You cannot do it.
And they keep changing it.
And they keep changing. And more importantly, a lot of indirect taxes they are cut. So essentially, you're penalizing the vulnerable people more than anyone else. And then you expect them, oh, why don't they file taxes? Well, I mean,
even now, so I mean, I think this budget exemplifies that, right? You have in salaries, you have slight adjustment, like starting from roughly 500 a month, going all the way up to like, I don't know, 7,000-8,000 a month, 8,000 or something a month. And then you have petroleum levy added, which is again regressive. Then you have carbon levy, which was 2.5 rupees, again regressive. So they're actively trying to move away from any sort of direct taxation and then rely entirely on indirect.
So that is, I mean, I think it's one of those things where the oil prices are low right now, you can play around with these things. Yes. The moment oil prices increase, all of this would be zero. Because the room to maneuver won't be there.
But we have seen still levies still being in place, obviously not to the same extent, not to the same caps,
right? How many levies can you have?
I mean if you look at energy, it's all levies
different names for it. You can call it a fee, you can call it a levy, you can call it a tax, you can call it being nice tax, you can like whatever. But how many levies are enough levies? That is the point. So
there doesn't seem to be any cap.
On petrol, you've got the PDL, you will have a carbon levy now, you've got the GST. GST is zero right now, multiple reasons for that. And there's just so much you can do with it, right? Maybe next year you can just say movement levy.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? So that is the thing. I mean, if you ask me, like fairly rough comments, but it's just like Groundhog Day. It's like the same. Yeah. It was last year or maybe before that. A lot more could have been done, and a lot more hasn't been done.
Absolutely, and I think I was looking at the poverty line numbers. So this is a crazy calculation, really. I mean, you've set the poverty line at $4.2 a day. That comes to about $1,500 a year. Okay, and the tax bracket, the smallest tax bracket is it comes to about $3,500 a year, which is 1.2 million. So now an average household in Pakistan is 6.4 people, right? So if there is only one income earner in that 5-person or 7-person household, each person is down to $550 a year. That family or that household is already under the poverty line. So we don't look at it that way. And if we were to look at the poverty numbers and you look at the number of income earners in a family or in a household, and you look at the tax slabs, you'll realize that the poorest of people who can't really make ends meet. And if I were to back calculate, the minimum tax slab should be about $9,000 a year.
So the other thing, right? You talked about the Laffer curve.
Yeah.
We're on the other side of the Laffer curve right now.
Yes.
It's the laughing curve. It's like an inverted smile at this point.
Yeah.
You're on the other side of the Laffer curve. Why? Because you've overtaxed. Now you'd rather be untaxed and not pay anything. The Laffer curve is the point, right? It's optimal somewhere there, but when you go beyond it, you reach a point where you'd rather not pay. That's why within that segment, within that salary, you have a lot of cash payments that go out as well. A lot of cash salaries that happen as well, and justifiably so.
And it makes perfect sense, right? You realign the incentives in the economy. So you shifted the incentive structure so that people move away from one investments in or documentation of the economy. It's like, a child is learning to walk, a toddler is learning to walk, and you put a weighted vest on them, and then you start sprint interval training. It's never going to work. So you have to let the economy first document, and then you start imposing taxes on it. And I work a lot with early stage companies, and I notice that, the first 3, 4, 5 years, they don't even make much money. So getting bogged down with FBR and the taxes and 29% corporate tax rate, that literally adds so much nuisance.
Compliance costs.
I mean everything. If you're a private limited company and as a director, basically you're early stage private limited company and as director, you're probably not drawing a salary if you're a bootstrapped company, right? So you're probably going to declare dividend or reimburse through multiple.
I think early stage like a few, maybe a few hundred out there, but we also always talk about the retailer or the wholesaler or whatever. See, the point is, I worked with, everyone wants to pay tax, but no one likes the nuisance of it all. And more importantly, having an arbitrary number in place never helps anyone.
Absolutely.
So if you just say, okay, you know what, whatever shops they exist here, they just pay 20,000 a month. Why? So you've got to get to a point where I think one thing that could have been done, universal POS utilization, that could have helped.
That has taken a complete backseat over the last couple of years.
So
in
I was
2021, they were pushing.
I mean, all payments need to be digital. There are a lot of jurisdictions out there where you cannot buy anything more than, let's say in Pakistan, let's say more than 50,000 rupees in one via cash. Simply cannot do that. I mean, just make it happen and eventually things will work out. If you don't make it happen, then,
But I don't think there's a political will to actually go that far, right?
I mean, even if there's a political will, is the administrative will there?
So neither exists. Neither administrative will.
Because the technology does exist.
So, I mean, on that actually, recently in this budget, I mean, they have introduced not exactly the same thing at retail level, but they've tried to introduce something similar for e-commerce. They've talked about e-commerce stores, like mandating e-commerce stores to share their transactional data, and that will be used for tax collection.
And you and I both know how that's going to end up. You'll have multiple people, one person having multiple stores in place.
And I mean, even I don't know, like where does it start, right? So if I start selling, I don't know, like thrift watches tonight, why do I need to come into the net and then share that data? I mean, what does the government have to do?
So that's the thing, right? You need to give that carrot first before you can give a stick.
Absolutely.
You start with a stick first and then just say there is no carrot. So when you just say that, no one's going to come. And I just looked at the procedure for e-commerce. Whoever wrote this probably hasn't shopped online ever. Has never seen an e-commerce business actually operating.
Absolutely.
I think that's generally the case with decision making, and a lot of decisions are made by people like if you talk to any senior banker and they'll talk about branch experience, I don't think they've visited
never been to a branch
because a rider goes in their place.
Oh, the rider will check leke jata hai sabko.
So the same thing, literally the same thing is for e-commerce. How exactly do you mandate and get transactional data? I mean, maybe sure you can do with Daraz and a couple of big others who are afraid enough to maybe or in the limelight enough to comply. But even then, I mean, they would have an incentive to bypass the system wherever they can, through whichever entity they
So
can.
that's the thing, there's always, I mean, historically, there have been wars, there have been civil uprisings because of taxes. No one has ever liked paying taxes throughout human history. But there is a way to get it done. And that way can either be either through force or through an incentive structure.
And I think penalties, when poorly enforced, and this is market knowledge, penalties are very poorly enforced. They don't work. So you need to bring in some incentives. So most of the retailers, I was watching something, a podcast with Shabar Zaidi in it, and he said none of the retailers are private limited companies, not a single one in Pakistan. Why is that? Because if you can fly under the radar, why would you? So that inhibits Pakistani companies' growth ambitions as well. And at the same time, there is a huge parallel economy. We have no idea what its growth rate is.
So that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When in agri products, when you produce something, let's say an apple or a mango, you just sell it, there is no tax. You can buy it like 300 rupees a kilo, there is no tax. But the moment you add value to it, suddenly 18% tax. So you effectively discourage.
Or you sell it in the supermarket, you buy it from Fresh Basket or wherever, you'll have to pay 18%.
Yeah, you have to pay 18%. So effectively, you're just saying, okay, why are you even bothering to add value? Why are you stupid to add value at this?
Yeah, you wouldn't, right?
And that delta has always been there. I mean, across value chains, right? Across sectors, whenever you try to go through a formal player, your price impact will be significant.
Which should be the other way around.
Exactly.
To incentivize, it should actually be the other way
cheaper.
around. It should be cheaper. And you need to make cash transactions, or you need to make informal transactions more expensive.
More expensive, absolutely. But if you use your credit card to pay at any establishment, half the time the terminal doesn't work. Okay, the other half the time, there's XYZ taxes that are added onto the bill because even restaurants or many of these establishments, they prefer to receive cash payments. They don't want you to pay.
Yeah, everyone has like dual systems in place.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I pay via, I barely carry cash. I just do account transfer or something. And again, coming back to the retailer wholesaler point, whether they want to pay tax or not. Everyone wants to pay tax, but they cannot go and open a bank account. Absolutely. Not a single SME actually operates under an SME name, they operate under their individual account. Yep. So they can maximum receive maybe 50,000 rupees a day or 20,000 rupees a day. Boom, then you're not considered as businesses. And they're like, why should I bother again when I can just take cash?
So on the cash side, there's actually a very important thing to consider, is because over the last few years, we have seen actual digitization of transactions, whether it's banking transactions. I mean, roughly 55-58% of all banking transactions are already digital, and obviously I'm not including the ATM transactions in this case. But even beyond that, I mean, go to Islamabad and start from Kareem to any Food Panda, or not Food Panda, any small restaurant. And this actually happened with me like hardly a week ago at Tariq Road Signal, Allah Wala, Chaurangi, and a beggar came and said, I don't have cash. Just cash it to me. So this actually happened. Like we have heard stories from India, right?
So yeah, people do use it, but
that entire transfer value chain is not captured anywhere. Banks do not know what quantum of it is going towards merchant transactions.
They don't know.
Because it's all P2P. Because all fund transfers are P2P, banks haven't really bothered to maybe identify what like let's say the transaction is coming from the geography or vicinity of Technocity or Tariq Road. So they haven't really bothered to actually identify what quantum of it is coming from merchant.
But isn't it tagged to your CNICs?
I mean, laptop is a great example. You buy a laptop formally, you have to pay 18% tax. You pay it on cash, you'll get on. Like, why will you pay 18% more again?
Yeah, the consumer is also incentivized.
There we go.
Even if it's digital. So my point is, even if it's digital, even if it's through funds transfer, because that's the biggest digital component.
Even then it's not recorded as a commercial transaction.
Exactly. So how do you get these P2P transfers, P2P transactions? So the customers are digital to a large extent, and retailers are also digital. The only question is the system they are using is not.
It's more of a P2P person to person than. So broad thoughts. I think we talked about a lot about cash and the informal economy and the inability to really tap that or just create incentives. I don't think much is going to happen there. I don't think there will be a mini budget either because they've kept the revenue fairly stable. Expenditure won't increase either, so it'll be just like a very stable continuation. I mean, that is fine from a pure macroeconomic stability angle.
But there's no growth.
But even then, I wasn't expecting any growth either. But there is no structural reform.
There's no, even in the line items, there is no substantial change anywhere, right?
There is no, what my thing is, growth cannot happen till you have more dollars. That's the end game. Whether you get the investment, whether you get the export, whether you get it through borrowing. But there is no reform either on how to make things marginally better.
Those lines, I think. They don't want to include agri, they don't want to include retail, they don't want to include real estate. Where will you get it from? And the thing is, if you look at the savings and investment rate, it's about 14%. A lot of your banking sector deposits, if you look at the capacity to grow in the economy, it's already there. You know, your typical banking sector ADR is about 40%, thereabouts, right? You have like 30 trillion rupees worth of deposits. If you take that ADR to 60 or 70%, there's so much room in the economy to grow. Why does it not grow? Because you're stifling the SMEs, you're stifling the corporate sector. So
because it's not formal. Again, it's the thing, right? Why would you bother investing in a risky venture when you'll be taxed at 29%?
Exactly, there's no incentive.
So might as well buy another plot of land, and you can just do it there.
Even in SME, I mean, Ammar previously mentioned agri, right? So in Pakistan, we'll talk a lot about agri financing, but the biggest problem is financing is a much later problem. I mean, the biggest problem is actually agri deposits. We aren't mobilizing enough deposits from the agri sector. What I think it's like 400-ish billion, if I'm not mistaken, the last number.
So that's the thing. Now, for me, agri is a loss-making initiative anyway. It's not like you're making mega profits every year.
It's not even giving you food security now.
So again, that's a different debate altogether. It's economically, it's not like a super profitable venture until you really increase your yields or whatever. So what are you really going to tax at that point? You're going to actually create more problem if you say, okay, you know what, we'll just tax you on the basis of minimum tax, like you've destroyed other sectors.
Fair enough, but I mean, the first starting point should be that we find out what the sector is really about, and one of the ways would be to formalize, and not necessarily taxation, just formalizing in order to understand what's happening in the sector. And I think that is the problem, because the entire sector is outside formal financial services net. And I'm not even talking about lending or investment, I'm talking about basic deposit products. We don't know. Again, less than 400 billion, if I'm not mistaken, is from or somewhere. So there are twice as many loans to agri than there are deposits. And that's just because of government targets, right? SBP targets.
Yeah.
So if you actually push towards agri and then try to get them in the normal banking service, there's hardly any cost. I mean, the cost of servicing is not that high, considering that there is enough deposits available in the system. And I think that is fairly certain. We've seen GDP is still large enough for banks to add 5 trillion-ish, let's say.
So that's the thing, right? It is about integrating that value chain. And as I said, I mean, it's fine if you're selling raw fruit, but the moment you add value, someone comes and says, why are you adding value? You're stupid like that. So you just stop adding value. And that's why, as you said earlier, you don't really scale up either.
Yeah, you don't,
because if you're even adding value, you'll just start adding value to 3 or 4 different entities to avoid that tax rather than just actually scaling up.
But we need to eventually make agri more efficient and more productive, right? And
eventually, yes.
So
in the long run, we are all dead.
Landholding tax. Like, you know, if you're a landowner and you're not productive, you're not producing any income.
Unproductive land. I mean, there's a way to do it. I mean, if you're really looking into that, you can actually start with unproductive land in urban areas first.
Yes.
There's a lot of land which is unutilized everywhere in the world. If there is unutilized land, you pay a fairly high price for it.
Yeah. So you could start there. Don't worry about the income.
So then the thing is, a lot of people say these are more provincial issues rather than federal issues, and you can just like shrug it off like
but
that.
At least agree. I mean, recently the AIT regime that was supposed to be amended, it does call for alignment of provincial tax regimes, agri-tax regimes with the federal income tax, right? So there is, at least in the last few months, we have seen some conversation. I wouldn't even say execution, obviously, but there's been some conversation. There is a way that the government has proposed itself. I mean, it's not my proposal. They're trying to talk about harmonization and like connecting those value chains between, and then making that linkage between federal and provinces.
So that's nice, right? But then the fiscal disincentive continues to exist. As you said earlier, if you want to add value, it's just too expensive. You might as well import apricot jam from Turkey rather than make apricot jam here.
That's 100%.
At this point.
Actually, that applies to pretty much every
Pretty
product.
much everything.
Every product.
Cotton is the biggest case.
Yeah.
Every apricot is a very niche commodity.
Yeah.
Cotton is the biggest case here. So these are distortions in the economy, and I don't think anything has been done to really remove those distortions on sector level basis or on a federal, on any sector. I've not seen anything. Maybe if you have, you
So
can.
the only thing that could still warrant some attention is the mention of, or at least the reiteration of this custom duty and additional custom duty and regulatory duties being phased out over the next four and 5 years.
So that is fine. It's some start somewhere.
At least, I mean, because the problem is not that, forget the impact on price, the problem is the reliance on RDs and ACDs that government has shown over the last few years, and I think that is the problem.
So yeah, you need to reduce this and just like
It
take up something
incentivizes
else.
laziness effectively, right? All, not just ADs and ACDs and RDs and FEDs and whatever name you come up with, movement tax or whatever. So government has become I mean, of course, I wouldn't say it was ever equipped, but it has become even more ill-equipped to actually mobilize taxes that are required.
And all of these taxes are inflationary as well.
They add,
entirely
it's
inflationary.
It adds
X
to
percent
your
of-
cost of
yeah.
business. It's inflationary. It adds to your cost of business. Just bad. And again, coming back to the Laffer curve, you're beyond that optimal point. So any increase will actually reduce economic activity in the formal sphere. And once you're in the informal sphere, you cannot scale up. You cannot grow big enough.
We have seen some isolated examples. One big retailer who shall not be named.
No. They do tons of tax evasion. Every big
No,
retailer,
that's
and
what-
this is precisely why.
No, I'm saying they've scaled up despite being informal.
And this is why you do not have any major foreign retailer operating in the
That's
country
true.
right now because they cannot compete. You can have a big retailer who's just evading tons of taxes, but thus other party has to pay those taxes. So
Yeah.
you're simply not competitive, and this is why people ask, why don't we get FDI? Like,
So we know what happened with the Taj scheme, right? The entire collection size was what, 3 million?
and I mean that was a thing to really just like mollify the IMF at this point, which wants to be mollified.
Yeah,
That's
there has to be a new FBR digitization program every
Yeah,
2
IMF
years or something, right?
IMF likes to be mollycoddled like that. Like, it's fine. It's like whatever. So yeah, final thoughts.
Final thoughts? Well, more of the same, really. So, not excited about much. Whatever relief was given to the salary class was taken away in terms of levies on transportation. The cost of transportation will go up. A lot of other goods have been included in the GST regime. So, this will drive inflation.
What has been included?
So, other consumer products, everything that is, I believe it's ultra processed foods, it's
Snacks.
They've included cars in it. So GST, whatever cars, I think it was smaller cars that were subject to 14 or 13% GST, they now have to pay 18% GST. So all of that has been included, and I think it, again, so the relief that was given has been taken away in another form. So it's all balanced for people. So I don't think it is a very negative budget for the people, but it's not a positive budget as
जो
well.
5,000 रुपए बचेंगे वो कहीं और चले
वो कहीं और
जाएंगे.
चले जाएंगे in the other
5,
pocket, but
4.5, 5,000 रुपए जितने
So
बच
net
रहे हैं.
effect on people also, I think it's 0, which is also a relief. And
So I think that is our initial hypothesis now. It's just continuation of last year, with just slight modifications here and there, which is fine. I mean,
the heads, but
for-
you're still charging them.
which is fine if like for stabilization purposes, but there is no serious
And
reform.
there should be a pathway towards growth, right? I mean, you cannot be in a perpetually stabilization.
No, I mean, see, the
perpetual
thing is,
stabilization phase.
you can't grow till you either export or get more
Sure,
investments.
but there
you
should be
need
a pathway to that.
move towards
Exactly.
that path of investment and growth, and this is not moving towards that path.
And that requires some reform, which
Like,
is
for example,
exactly
if you
what
want to
you're saying.
increase investment to GDP, increasing cash withdrawal and cash to 1% will not increase savings rate at all. You can like do whatever the hell you want. You cannot do that. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Naveen. Thank you, Mutaher. Always a pleasure. All right, this is it for yet another episode of All Things Money. And like every time, it's a Groundhog Day for the budget. Thank you for watching. Till next time.